He walked into the diner in worn boots, ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, and tested a woman's kindness without her knowing she was being tested. But what happens when Keanu Reeves, disguised as a broke drifter, falls for the very waitress he's deceiving? What she discovers later will break your heart and change everything. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. It started with a question Keanu Reeves couldn't get out of his head. How many of your friendships would survive if people didn't know who you were? It was Frank who asked it. The man had never been impressed by fame. Keanu had met him years ago at a reading program for underprivileged kids. Frank had been a public school teacher for nearly 3 decades before switching careers to become a community social worker, the kind of person who spent more time listening than speaking, who noticed the things that others overlooked. He was also one of the few people in Keanu's life who treated him exactly the same, whether he was walking into a gala or showing up with coffee in hand and 3-day stubble. They were sitting in the back of a quiet cafe on a rainy Tuesday when Frank asked that question. Keanu didn't answer right away. He just stared at his cup, watching the swirl of cream settle into silence. Frank leaned in, resting his elbows on the table. I don't mean the people who say they love you. I mean the ones who would invite you into their lives if you were just some guy named Kevin. No red carpets, no press, just you. That night, the words echoed in Keanu's mind, louder than the traffic outside his penthouse windows, sharper than the lights that flickered across billboards bearing his face. He had spent his whole adult life surrounded by admiration, recognition, and manufactured intimacy. Yet he couldn't name 3 people who had ever sat with him in silence without wanting something in return. And so, the next morning, he made a decision that would change everything. He met Frank again the following day, this time at Frank's modest office inside a community development center in downtown Los Angeles. The walls were decorated with children's drawings and flyers for food banks. Keanu walked in wearing jeans and an old flannel shirt. No entourage, no sunglasses, no security detail. I want to do it, Keanu said simply. Frank raised an eyebrow. Do what? Disappear, Keanu replied. Just for a week. I want to see the world, the way it sees the people it usually ignores. Frank didn't smile, didn't nod. He just studied Keanu for a long moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a weathered file folder. Inside was a profile he had written months ago as part of a housing support simulation for city council members. Kevin Ryder, Frank said, handing it over. 39. Used to write for local magazines. Laid off during the pandemic, living in a rent-controlled unit near MacArthur Park. No car, no credit, no plan. Keanu opened the folder and stared at the photo stapled to the corner. It wasn't him, but it could be. The man looked tired, not broken, just worn out by life's quiet battles. I'll be him, Keanu said softly. Frank nodded. Then let's begin. The next 48 hours were a quiet blur of transformation. Keanu turned off his phone, left it with Frank, along with his wallet and everything that could betray who he really was. In return, Frank handed him a cracked Android phone with a prepaid SIM and $27 in cash. No credit cards, no backdoor escape. They agreed on the boundaries. Keanu would check in once a day by text. He wouldn't use his real name, contacts, or resources. If someone recognized him, which Frank warned might still happen despite the unshaven beard and thrift store clothes, he was to deflect, deny, and leave. The apartment was smaller than anything Keanu had lived in since his early 20s. A third-floor walk-up in a building that smelled faintly of mildew and old cooking oil. The radiator clicked when it was cold. The bathroom fan wheezed when the light was on. A mattress on the floor, a chipped folding table, a dented saucepan. That was it. Still, there was something grounding about it. Keanu, now Kevin Ryder, stood in the doorway that first evening, watching the sunset filter through dusty blinds. No paparazzi outside, no security cameras inside, just the silence of a place no one cared to visit. You lay down on the mattress and stared at the ceiling, which had a faint water stain shaped like a question mark. He lay down on the mattress and stared at the ceiling, which had a faint water stain shaped like a question mark. He thought about all the people who had ever smiled at him just a little too hard, just a little too fast. He thought about the conversations that had been more about his fame than about his voice, about the way people treated him with reverence or suspicion or curiosity, but rarely just as a man with good days and hard ones, with quiet fears and no need to perform. It wasn't self-pity. It was clarity. Fame had given him much, but it had also taken something subtle and sacred: the ability to walk into a room and be unknown. That was the experiment now. He walked the streets as Kevin Ryder, faded sneakers, frayed hoodie, a spiral-bound notebook in his backpack. He scribbled down thoughts as he wandered through Koreatown, past shuttered stores and busy taquerias. No one stopped him. No one asked for a selfie. Most barely glanced in his direction. And that, strangely, was a relief. At a small library on 6th Street, he lingered over books on writing, asked the librarian where the nearest food pantry was. She handed him a printed list without blinking. At a community board, he saw a flyer: help needed, short-staffed diner, no experience required. It was taped next to another, smaller sign in a child's handwriting: robots can fix hearts someday. I'll build one. Keanu smiled. He took out his notebook and wrote a single line: sometimes you have to lose your name to find your place. By the morning of day 3, Kevin Ryder had begun to feel real. He woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, someone arguing softly in Spanish behind a paper-thin wall, and a baby crying down the corridor. The mattress springs creaked beneath him as he sat up, stretching out the tension in his back. A single glance in the mirror confirmed what he hoped. His disguise, more posture than costume, was holding. His shoulders slouched just enough, his jaw unshaven, his gaze avoiding eye contact like someone who'd had too many doors closed in his face. After a quick rinse at the rusty sink and toast made in a pan with butter he'd rationed from a food box, Keanu knew Kevin headed out into the city. He didn't take a car. He didn't even take the bus. He walked. He passed dozens of people along the way, mothers dragging toddlers to school, men unloading crates behind convenience stores, 2 teenagers laughing with breakfast burritos in hand. No one noticed him. Not as Keanu. Not even as someone worth a second look. It was both liberating and humbling. At a small park, he sat on a bench beside an older man feeding pigeons. They nodded to each other without a word, just 2 strangers sharing space. No adoration, no curiosity, just stillness. In that stillness, a truth settled in. This world, the one he now walked through anonymously, moved at a different pace. It was a place of tired smiles, worn sneakers, and quiet resilience. It wasn't filtered through celebrity, ego, or social media. It was raw, honest, and painfully beautiful in a way his other world rarely let him see. Later that day, he returned to the library, sat near the window in the reference section, read classified ads from the back of a newspaper, and circled a few that might fit Kevin Ryder's skills. Freelance writing gigs, a call for a night shift stalker, a tutoring center looking for help. And then, as if guided by something unseen, his eyes landed again on that same flyer he'd noticed the day before, the one taped crookedly on the community board. Short-staffed diner looking for help. Inquire within. No experience needed. He pulled it gently from the board and studied the address. Something about it called to him. Not for the job itself, but the simplicity of it. a place where no one would ask about movies, premieres, or red carpets. Just orders, tables, and tips. A chance to be useful without the weight of expectation. That afternoon, he stood across the street from the small corner diner listed on the flyer. The sign read, Sunnyside Diner. Hand-painted letters, a window smudged by little handprints. He inhaled deeply, then crossed the street. Inside, the bell above the door chimed softly. A woman behind the counter looked up, worn apron, tired eyes. But when she saw him, she smiled anyway. "Looking for work?" she asked. Kevin nodded once. "I might be," he said, "if you're still hiring." The bell above the cafe door gave a soft jingle as Ryder stepped inside. It was a narrow space, tucked between a laundromat and a thrift shop, the kind of place people didn't notice unless they needed it. The sign outside read Sunbeam Cafe, faded from years of sun and weather, but inside the scent of fresh bread and brewed tea lingered in the air. Kevin walked slowly toward a booth in the back. His boots were worn, the soles thin. His coat hung loose from his frame, thrifted and stitched back together in two places. He carried no phone, no briefcase, just a battered leather notebook and a pen tucked into the seam. He had $5 in his wallet and a hunger that went deeper than food. A waitress appeared a moment later. She looked about 30, her dark hair pulled back loosely, strands falling over one cheek. Her name tag read Eva. She offered a small smile that didn't feel rehearsed. "Cold morning," she said, setting a glass of water in front of him. "Can I get you something warm?" Kevin hesitated. "Just the tea, black if you have it." "Sure thing," she nodded, then glanced at his hands. They were red from the cold. Without a word, she walked away and returned with a small towel, warmed from the dish dryer. "Here," she said, handing it to him quietly. "Wrap your hands for a bit. Tea'll be out in a minute." He took it slowly. "Thanks." Eva didn't press him. She went back to the counter, greeted a man in a delivery uniform, refilled another customer's cup. The cafe had 5 tables and 6 stools at the bar. Everyone seemed to know each other, except him. Kevin watched her move from table to table, never rushing, never overly cheerful, just real. When she brought the tea, she also placed a small plate of toast beside it. 2 slices, lightly buttered, warm from the grill. "I didn't order this," he said softly. "Nope," she said, smiling again. "But it looked like you hadn't eaten. On the house." "Don't argue, I'll win." He couldn't remember the last time someone had done something like that without asking for anything back. He looked at the toast for a moment before picking it up. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cold anymore, but something else. Humility. Maybe even shame. "It's good," he murmured after the first bite. "I'd hope so," she said, sliding into the booth across from him for a brief second. "My mom used to say toast is only as good as the hands that make it." Kevin smiled for the first time that morning. She was right. Eva checked her watch and stood. "Lunch crowd's about to roll in. Let me know if you need more tea." He nodded. "Thanks, Eva." She turned back with a raised eyebrow. "You read my name tag?" "No," he replied, his voice quieter. "I pay attention." She looked at him for a long second, then disappeared behind the counter. Kevin lingered at the table long after the toast was gone and the tea had gone cold. He wasn't sure why he stayed. Maybe it was the quiet warmth of the place, or maybe it was the way Eva had treated him. Without judgment, without pity. That kind of grace was rare. Eventually, the lunch crowd came and went. By mid-afternoon, only 2 customers remained, an elderly couple sharing soup and stories. Eva moved more slowly now, the morning rush behind her. She wiped the same counter twice, checked her phone briefly, then glanced over toward Kevin's table. "You writing something in that book of yours?" she asked, coming over with a refill of hot water for his tea. He looked up, trying. "Words don't always show up when I want them to." She eased onto the edge of the booth across from him, not quite sitting, not quite leaving. "What kind of writing?" "Stories," he said. Mostly about people. Real people? Always. She smiled softly. Then you've come to the right place. This neighborhood's full of stories. Is that right? Eva looked over at the couple near the window. See them? Been coming here every Thursday for 18 years. They sit in that exact spot, even if it's taken. They wait. He proposed to her here, right at that table, with a paper napkin ring. Kevin leaned back slightly. That's better than most endings I've written. Eva's eyes flickered. Not all stories end well, though. He watched her face change. She didn't seem aware of it, but something closed off inside her, not out of anger, more like caution. He recognized the shift. It was the look of someone deciding how much of their truth they were willing to risk. You okay? He asked. Eva nodded, then shook her head lightly. Sorry, I didn't mean to unload. You're just easy to talk to. I don't mind. She paused, looking at the mug in his hands. I have a daughter, Sofia. She's 9, smartest kid I've ever met. Kevin smiled. She take after you. Eva's voice caught for a second. She's a builder. I mean, she's into robotics. Not like toy stuff, real things. Last year, she designed a mechanical arm that could mimic handwriting from voice input. That's incredible. She wants to work in medical tech someday, Eva said. Says she's going to build robots that fix human hearts. Kevin nodded. Sounds like she already is. Eva exhaled. She has a heart condition, a rare one. Doctors say she'll need surgery before she turns 10. Kevin sat still. It's congenital, Eva continued, something she was born with. She's okay for now, but it's a race against time. Is she in school? Part-time? Some days she's too tired, but she loves it, especially the science lab. They let her stay late when they can. Her teacher says she's ahead by 2 grades in engineering concepts. There was a proud smile behind Eva's eyes, but also pain. Kevin felt it. Sounds like she's something special. Eva nodded. She is? Kevin wanted to ask more, but didn't. Some stories needed silence to grow. She stood. Let me get you a fresh pot of tea. Kevin watched as Eva moved behind the counter, the rhythm of her steps quieter now. She poured hot water into a fresh teapot with steady hands, but her shoulders slumped just slightly. He noticed things like that, not out of habit, but because once you stripped away the noise of wealth and cameras, people's real stories showed up in the silences. He returned and placed the new pot on the table. In the house, she said. You don't have to keep doing that, Kevin replied. I know, she said softly, but I want to. He hesitated, then asked, how do you manage it all? Eva sat down across from him again, this time fully. The sunlight through the window outlined the strain in her features, like someone who hadn't had a full night of sleep in years but was still standing out of love. I do what I can, she said. I work double shifts here. I pick up cleaning jobs some evenings. I sell hand-painted mugs online. The school gave Sofia a partial scholarship for the robotics club, but medical bills... Her voice trailed off. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Kevin had seen the cost of care. He'd donated to hospitals and research institutions his entire adult life. But from this side of the counter, everything looked different. No endowments, no executive summaries, just a mother trying to keep her daughter alive. Does she know? He asked. Sofia? Eva shook her head. Not really. She knows her heart's different, but I try to let her be a kid for as long as possible. There's time for the rest later. Kevin looked down at his tea, then back at Eva. You're strong. Eva gave a small, tired laugh. I don't feel strong most days. I feel like I'm treading water, hoping the tide doesn't pull us under. There was no drama in her voice, no self-pity, just truth. I grew up watching my mom do the same thing, Kevin said. Single parent, worked the late shift, wore the same coat for 5 winters in a row. Eva tilted her head. Did you turn out okay? He smiled faintly. I think so. Some days more than others. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then she stood. I should get back. Doris will scold me if she sees me sitting too long. Kevin stood too. Thanks for everything. Really. Come by again, she said. We open at 7. Toast and tea's always waiting. He looked around the tiny cafe once more. The cracked tile near the counter. The chipped mugs. The humming fridge that rattled every so often. It wasn't glamorous. But something about it felt more honest than any boardroom he'd ever walked into. I will, he said. And next time, I'm paying. She smirked. We'll see about that. As Kevin stepped outside, the late afternoon breeze caught the collar of his worn coat. He took a breath. The streets around him pulsed with quiet life. Kids on bikes, the soft bark of a dog down the alley, someone playing jazz through an open window upstairs. But all he could hear was the steady rhythm of Eva's voice, the way it wavered slightly when she talked about Sofia, and the way her eyes didn't. He had come here to learn about kindness. What he hadn't expected was to find someone practicing it without an audience. No reward, no recognition, just because. And that, he realized, was rarer than fame. He kept walking, but something in him had changed. He no longer felt like an actor playing a role. He was no longer just hiding behind the name Kevin Ryder. He was starting to see the world as it really was. The morning rush had slowed to a calm hum inside the cafe. Kevin pushed open the door and stepped out, the warm scent of toast and coffee still lingering in his sweater. He had just finished his second breakfast at Eva's cafe, and the silence outside felt like a shift in rhythm, gentle, grounding. As he moved across the sidewalk, an elderly woman near the curb caught his eye. She had a cloth tote over one shoulder, and the bottom seam had split just enough to send a cascade of groceries tumbling onto the asphalt. A can of tomatoes rolled under a parked car. A box of oatmeal landed with a thud near the storm drain. Kevin didn't hesitate. He quickened his pace and crouched beside her, carefully lifting the bruised apples from the pavement. "Let me help you," he said quietly. The woman, probably in her 70s, looked startled for a second, then smiled faintly. "Thank you, young man. This bag's older than my knees." Kevin chuckled. That's saying something. Together they picked up each item. Kevin even dropped to his stomach to reach under the car for the runaway can. When he stood up, he gently handed her a replacement paper bag he'd grabbed from a nearby trash bin and helped repack everything. "Are you okay to carry it?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm just around the corner." "And you've already done more than enough." He offered his arm anyway. She took it without resistance. Across the street, Eva stood by the diner window, wiping a coffee pot dry. Her eyes drifted up just as Kevin helped the woman to her feet. Something in the scene made her pause. Maybe the way he didn't look around to see if anyone was watching, or the careful patience in his body language. No rush, no ego, just quiet help. Inside the diner, Doris followed her gaze. "What's up?" Eva said nothing, just gave a small, surprised smile and went back to rinsing the pot. Kevin returned 10 minutes later, his hands lightly scuffed from the pavement but his heart unexpectedly full. He hadn't planned to do anything that morning beyond eat, walk, and maybe stop by the thrift bookstore a few blocks over. But those simple minutes in the parking lot had shifted something inside him. Back in his apartment, he sat on the edge of the worn-out mattress, staring at the wall where a small hook still held someone else's forgotten photo frame. Then he grabbed his notebook and pen. It wasn't a movie script or press interview or foundation proposal. Just a page. He wrote one word at the top. Dignity. Kevin leaned back against the creaky wall, notebook in hand, and stared at what he had just written. Dignity. The word looked too small for what he felt. He let the silence wrap around him as he tried to describe the look in the old woman's eyes. Grateful, a little embarrassed, but proud. She hadn't asked for help. She'd tried to pick it all up herself until her hands started to shake, and yet when help came, she didn't shrink. She accepted it with grace. That mattered. He kept writing. There's something unspoken in these people, something no red carpet or luxury suite can offer. When they help, they mean it, and when they receive help, they hold their heads high. Kevin paused, tapping the pen against his knee. He was starting to feel like a visitor in someone else's life, but not in a bad way. More like he had been invited into a quiet space most people never noticed. The world he usually lived in was loud and curated, every gesture examined, every kindness filmed and interpreted. But here, nobody knew who he was. Nobody expected anything. So every interaction, every exchange felt real. He thought of Eva. She didn't treat him like a ghost. She didn't fawn or flinch. When she gave him toast, she did it not to earn praise, but because she could. Her compassion came with no conditions. That's what made it feel different. He flipped to a new page and jotted down another word, invisible. He underlined it twice. He wasn't used to being invisible, not anymore. But as Kevin Ryder, freelance writer, down on his luck, forgotten by luck, he had walked through the streets like any other broke man. People had bumped into him without apologizing. Store clerks had eyed him cautiously. A woman had crossed the street when he approached too quickly, even though he was just trying to get to the other side. He didn't blame them. It was just how the world worked. But today, in that small act in the parking lot, something shifted. For a moment, he had mattered. Not as Keanu Reeves, not as a celebrity or a name, but as a man helping another person carry the weight of a day. Kevin closed the notebook gently and looked around the room. There were holes in the curtains and a draft by the window. The floor creaked every time he shifted his weight. But it didn't feel empty. Not now. It felt lived in, grounded. He got up and made tea. It was a ritual he'd picked up over the last few days, one he hadn't done in years. Back in Hollywood, there were assistants, schedule managers, drivers. But here, he boiled water himself, chose his own mug from the thrift store stack, and stood quietly while the bag steeped. As the steam rose from the chipped porcelain, Kevin stood still. He didn't know what the rest of the week would bring. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The next morning, Kevin woke up to the sound of buses outside, the muffled thrum of early workers making their way through another long day. He sat on the edge of the mattress, still in yesterday's clothes, and looked around the apartment like he was seeing it with new eyes. The cracks in the walls, the flickering hallway light, even the burnt-out street lamp outside. It all felt real. Not gritty in the cinematic sense, just human. He grabbed his notebook again. Helping isn't heroic, he wrote. It's normal here, expected even. A quiet code, like holding the door or offering your last dollar for gas. He thought about the old woman again, how she'd smiled at him with tired but appreciative eyes, clutching her paper bag to her chest like it was gold, and how afterward, when he passed the cafe window, he'd seen Eva watching. She hadn't waved, she hadn't said anything, just watched him for a second, her brow furrowed like she was trying to figure something out. Maybe she was. He left the apartment with no plan, only the desire to walk. The streets of this part of town had their own rhythm, children dragging backpacks behind them, old men arguing about baseball over milk crates, someone always sweeping a stoop or repairing something with makeshift tools. It was a neighborhood that breathed. Halfway down the block, a man pushing a shopping cart nodded at him. Kevin nodded back. That tiny gesture stuck with him longer than it should have. At a small park bench near the corner, Kevin sat and watched life unfold. A woman coaxed a toddler into his jacket. A teenager scribbled lyrics into a journal. A busker tuned his guitar with a look of quiet determination, though no one was watching. There was beauty in this slow-moving ordinary. His phone stayed off in his pocket. He hadn't touched it since the experiment began. He didn't want headlines or scripts or morning emails filled with polish. He wanted to stay in this rough draft version of life a little longer. As the wind picked up, Kevin zipped his jacket and looked up at the clouds. He felt something shift again. Not in the sky, but inside himself. A settling. A soft resolve. He would see Eva again tomorrow. Not because he had to. Not because it was part of the bet, but because he wanted to. She had given him extra toast. No fanfare, no performance, just a simple gesture of quiet kindness. And somehow, that felt like the beginning of everything. The next morning, Keanu stepped into the café with less hesitation. Something about the place had softened the edges of the week. Maybe it was the smell of brewed coffee and grilled toast. Maybe it was Eva's warmth. Maybe it was something deeper, something that tugged at the quiet places inside him. He slid into the same corner booth, the one near the window. Eva looked up from behind the counter and gave him a nod, a smile not too big, not too small, just enough to say she remembered him. "You're early today?" she said, bringing over his coffee without waiting for him to ask. Keanu returned the smile. Felt like a good place to start the morning. She poured the cup, steam rising between them. "You're in luck. No line at the griddle today. Want the usual?" "Please," he said, then paused. "Actually, add a side of scrambled eggs, if that's okay." Eva nodded, coming right up. He watched her walk back to the kitchen pass-through, easy in her movements, her apron streaked with flour. Then he pulled a thin package from his coat. Wrapped in a crinkled paper bag from a local bookstore, it wasn't much. Just a beginner's guide to coding for kids. A little workbook with funny robot illustrations and simple block language logic. But when he saw it on the shelf last night, he thought of the little girl Eva had mentioned. Sofia. Not long after, the diner bell jingled again. This time, a small voice followed. "Mom!" A girl about 9 years old bounded inside, wearing a hand-me-down jacket a size too large and a backpack covered in sticker residue. She had a spark in her step, a curiosity in her eyes that lit up the room. "There she is," Eva said from the counter. "Slow down, Sofia. You're early." "I finished my reading group fast," Sofia grinned, sliding onto a stool. "Mr. Bennett said I was focused today." Eva smirked. "Focused because of robotics club, I bet." Sofia's eyes lit up. "We're learning how to make a heart monitor app, but mine kept crashing because of a loop error." Keanu chuckled softly from the booth. Sofia turned. "Hi," she said, looking at him without judgment or caution. "You're the guy from yesterday." "Yeah," Keanu replied, touched by her memory. "I'm Kevin." "I'm Sofia. My mom said you like books too." He reached for the paper bag on the table, then held it out to her. "I saw this yesterday and thought of you." Sofia blinked. Then slowly took the package, unwrapping it with small, careful hands. Her mouth parted when she saw the title. "For me?" Keanu nodded. "All yours." She flipped through the pages, touching each illustration as if it might leap off the paper. "I've never had a real coding book," she whispered. Eva stood nearby, drying her hands on a dish towel, her eyes full. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," Keanu replied. "She has a brilliant mind." Sofia hugged the book to her chest. "I'm going to build robots that help doctors, so kids like me don't have to stay in hospitals forever." Keanu felt something catch in his chest. A long, quiet memory started to stir. Keanu leaned back in his booth, watching Sofia as she flipped eagerly through the workbook. Her lips moved silently as she read each page, her brow furrowed in fierce concentration. She had the intensity of someone who didn't just want to learn, she needed to. He recognized that fire. It was the same look he used to wear when he was her age, hiding in library corners to escape the chaos of the world outside. A memory came rushing back, clearer than expected. He was 10 years old, sitting on the floor of a public library in Toronto, shivering in his coat because the heater in their apartment had gone out again. His mother was working a double shift. He had no lunch. no plan, just hours to kill. That's when she appeared. Ms. Adler, the librarian with silver hair and purple glasses. She saw him sitting alone and walked over without a word. Moments later, she returned with a book, dog-eared and taped at the corners, called The Boy Who Fixed Everything. "You look like someone who needs this," she said gently, leaving the book beside him. He read the entire thing that day, twice, and when he got up to return it, Miss Adler waved him off. "You keep it," she smiled. "Sometimes the right book finds the right hands." That book lived with him for years, carried from apartment to apartment, battered like he was, but full of hope. A small thing, but it made him feel seen, like someone believed he could be more than what the world assumed. Watching Sofia now, he felt the same quiet magic unfolding. "You really want to build robots?" he asked. Sofia looked up, her eyes bright. "Not just robots, helpful ones. Ones that can fix things doctors miss. My heart has a valve that leaks. The doctor says surgery will help. But I think maybe one day we can make something better. Something that fixes the valve without opening the whole chest." Keanu blinked. "You came up with that?" "It's just an idea," she said modestly, "but I think about it a lot." Eva returned with Keanu's breakfast. She placed the plate gently in front of him, stealing a glance at Sofia. Her face carried both pride and worry. "She's always thinking," Eva said, brushing Sofia's curls away from her eyes. "And dreaming. I just hope the world makes space for that." Keanu met her gaze. "Sometimes all it takes is one person who sees you." Eva looked away quickly, pretending to wipe her hands again. Sofia tapped the book. "Do you like robots, too?" "I like the idea of them," Keanu replied. "Especially ones that heal instead of hurt." Sofia grinned. "Then we'll make a good team." He smiled. "Yeah, I think we will." The morning crowd in the cafe began to thin. Plates clinked, chairs scraped, and sunlight streamed lazily through the wide front window. Sofia was still deep in her workbook, and Eva was refilling someone's coffee near the corner. Keanu, still Kevin, here, watched the two of them with a quiet admiration he hadn't expected to feel. There was something deeply grounding about this place. No one asked for photos, no one stared or whispered. People simply saw him as another tired man in worn boots and flannel. And that anonymity had given him something his fame never could: authentic connection. Sofia slid the workbook toward him, pointing to a short exercise. "Can you help me understand this loop thing?" He leaned over. "Sure. See how this part repeats the steps? That's a loop. It's like telling the robot, keep doing this until I say stop." She nodded, absorbing it like a sponge. "So if I wanted the robot to check the valve again and again, I'd use a loop?" "Exactly." She gave a small, victorious gasp and started scribbling. Keanu felt something tighten in his chest, a mix of joy, admiration, and an old ache he hadn't visited in years. The ache of remembering what it meant to dream when no one else had the means to help you build it. When Eva returned, she noticed the open pages and the quiet way Keanu was guiding Sofia's hands over the code. She tilted her head. "You're good with kids." Keanu shrugged lightly. "Kids make sense to me. They say what they feel. They dream out loud." Eva studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "Sofia doesn't get a lot of people who listen like that, not even from me sometimes." "You're doing more than enough," Keanu said. "She's bright, kind, and imaginative. That doesn't happen by accident." Eva offered a small, tired smile. "I try. Some days it feels like just surviving." Keanu didn't answer right away. He thought of his own mother, working double and triple shifts to keep food on the table. The exhaustion in her eyes. The guilt when she couldn't afford school supplies, let alone dreams. "You're not alone in that feeling," he said softly. "But you're showing up. That matters." Eva didn't speak again, but she gave a quiet nod and returned to the kitchen. As Sofia continued drawing her heart-fixing robot in the margins of the workbook, Keanu made a silent promise to himself. He didn't know how, not yet, but this child's dream deserved a chance. And the woman who raised her deserved a break. Not because he was famous, but because it was the right thing to do. By the fourth day of his quiet experiment, the small café on the corner felt less like a stop and more like a rhythm. Keanu, still in the identity of Kevin Ryder, had found an unspoken routine with Eva and her daughter. Every morning, after the breakfast rush had settled, he helped bust the tables without being asked. Eventually, Eva handed him a dish rag and just nodded toward the sink. It wasn't charity, it was In exchange for his quiet labor, Eva began setting down a plate. 2 eggs, toast, and black coffee. No fanfare, no discussion. Just a quiet arrangement between 2 people trying to make ends meet. Sofia had started sitting beside him after school, dragging her backpack across the diner floor like it weighed more than she did. She'd brought her coding workbook, the one Keanu had given her, and asked him to explain loops and conditions. He did his best, sketching examples on napkins with a ballpoint pen. She was quicker than he expected for someone her age. Her ideas about robotics had already outpaced the workbook's lessons. She wasn't just interested in building robots. She was thinking about how they could be kind, how they could help nurses, relieve pain, hold hands when someone was scared. One afternoon, as Eva refilled a customer's iced tea, Keanu caught a flicker of emotion pass over her face. It was brief, a tightening of the jaw. A second later, it was gone, replaced by her practiced, warm smile. After the rush, she leaned against the counter near where Keanu was stacking plates. "You know," she said casually, "the owner cut my hours again." Keanu looked up from the dishes. "That the second time this month?" Eva nodded, folding her arms. "Said breakfast is slow, and he wants me working just lunch and part of dinner. It's fine, I'll figure it out." There was no panic in her voice, no self-pity, just that quiet resilience that had become familiar to him now. Still, he could tell the strain was mounting. Her shifts were longer, her breaks shorter. She moved with the same grace, but slower. Her smile faltered a little more often. Sofia didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did and just didn't say anything. Kids like her, kids who had already learned what adult silence meant, didn't always ask questions out loud. Keanu offered a small grin. "You ever take a break?" Eva raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" They shared a quiet laugh. But inside, Keanu felt something tighten in his chest. Every moment he spent around them made the lines between truth and disguise blur more. He had come here to test a theory, to disappear into an ordinary life. But there was nothing ordinary about the weight Eva carried, and nothing fake about the kindness she gave freely. He scrubbed harder at the plate in his hand, like effort could erase guilt. The truth was, he had the power to change everything for them. But Kevin Ryder did not. The next morning, Sofia came running in just before opening. She carried a folded paper in her hand and slammed it proudly onto the counter next to Keanu, who was already wiping down menus. "I made a blueprint," she announced, "for my helper bot." Keanu leaned over, careful not to smudge the crayon-drawn diagram with his damp rag. It was rough but brilliant. A robot with extendable arms, labeled grip sensors, and a screen that displayed calm messages like, "It's okay," and "You're safe." Sofia pointed to the part labeled empathy chip. "This is for recognizing emotions," she explained. "Like when someone's scared in the hospital, it should know and play soft music." He blinked, surprised by how thoughtfully detailed it was. "This is amazing," he said honestly. Sofia grinned and hopped up onto a stool. "I want it to be kind, like Mom." Eva, from across the diner, paused as she restocked the syrup dispensers. Her smile wavered for just a second when she overheard. She didn't say anything, but her eyes glistened briefly before she looked away. Later that day, during a lull between customers, Keanu sat beside Eva at the counter while Sofia napped in one of the booths, her head resting on a stack of clean aprons. "People who dream that torture us?" Keanu asked, gesturing toward the booth. Eva followed his gaze. "Not really." Even when things got bad with her heart, she kept asking for more books. Always more questions, more ideas. "I think it distracts her." Keanu nodded, unsure how much to say. "She's remarkable." "She's tough," Eva said, then exhaled. "But sometimes I worry she knows more than she should. About our situation. I try to keep it light, but she hears things." Silence lingered between them. Keanu turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. "She emailed about her father?" he asked gently. Eva didn't flinch. "Not often. He left when she was a baby. Couldn't handle the diagnosis, the appointments. I told her it was complicated, but kids understand abandonment even when you dress it up." Keanu looked down. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Eva said. "We're okay." But Keanu could tell they weren't. Not really. Eva was treading water in a rising tide. The cafe shifts weren't enough. Her hours were shrinking, and her daughter needed more than a few books and blueprint dreams. That night, Keanu lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of his small apartment. The walls were thin. He could hear someone arguing downstairs, a television blaring 2 doors down. He wasn't used to this. Not just the noise or the mattress. He wasn't used to feeling this helpless. He had never wanted to break character so badly. He thought about what he could offer without revealing himself. He had already searched for local robotics kits and found one modest set he could afford under Kevin's budget. But it felt like pennies tossed at a storm. Still, maybe even pennies could mean something. Tomorrow he'd find out. The next morning, Keanu arrived earlier than usual. The cafe lights were still off, but Eva was already inside, wiping down tables with a slow mechanical motion. She looked up, surprised to see him. "You're early," she said with a tired smile. "Thought I'd earned my toast today," Keanu replied, holding up a bottle of dish soap he'd brought from his apartment. "Figured the sink might be calling my name." Eva laughed lightly and unlocked the door for him. "You're definitely not what I expected when you first walked in." Keanu slipped behind the counter and started organizing the dishes from the drying rack. Most people aren't. Eva didn't respond to that right away. She moved to the window, pulled open the blinds, and stared out at the quiet street. "I lost 2 more hours next week," she said quietly. "Frank said it's temporary, just until things pick back up, but we both know that might be wishful thinking." Keanu set the last plate down and dried his hands. "What are you going to do?" Eva turned and shrugged. "I'll figure it out. I always do. Maybe pick up a cleaning job in the evenings, just until I can make the rent and keep Sofia's checkups on schedule. If she misses too many, the specialists might bump her down the list." He could see it in her eyes. The exhaustion, the math running through her head. Rent, bills, medication, time. Every equation came up short. "She still wants to be an engineer," Keanu said after a moment. "Still drawing blueprints." "She needs something to look forward to," Eva whispered. "She needs to believe that her dreams are still possible." Keanu hesitated, then reached into his bag and pulled out the small robotic starter kit he'd purchased late the night before. It wasn't much, just a basic set of circuits and sensors, but it was enough to build a simple, programmable robot. "She'll love this," he said, sliding it across the counter. Eva looked at the box, then at him, her eyes wide. "You bought this?" she asked, her voice catching. Keanu nodded. "I told her I'd help her build something real." Eva picked up the box slowly, her fingers brushing the edge like it was something delicate. "Thank you," she said. "That's incredibly kind." "It's nothing," Keanu said quickly. "No," Eva said, meeting his eyes. "It's not nothing." He didn't know how to respond. Part of him wanted to tell her the truth, to let her know that he could solve so much more than this. But another part of him knew that what mattered more was this moment, the honesty of it, the simplicity. When Sofia arrived that afternoon and saw the box, her joy lit up the cafe like sunshine. She hugged Keanu hard, tighter than he expected. "I'm going to make a robot nurse," she declared proudly. "One that gives hugs and tells jokes." Keanu laughed, but inside, the guilt pressed heavier. He could buy her a lab, fund her future, erase Eva's worry in seconds. But for now, he was just Kevin, and Kevin wasn't supposed to have the power to change the world. The cafe felt unusually quiet that morning, the kind of stillness that made even the hum of the fridge in the back sound louder than usual. Keanu slipped through the door just as the sun peeked over the tops of the nearby buildings. He had started showing up earlier, partly to help prep, partly because he found a kind of peace in the slow rhythm of the diner before the rush. But today the energy felt different. Eva wasn't at her usual post behind the counter. Instead, it was Doris, the older part-time cook, who greeted him with a nod. "She's running a little late," Doris said. "Rough night, I think." Keanu nodded, unsure whether to ask more. He didn't have to wait long. 10 minutes later, Eva came through the side door, and everything about her looked wrong. Her hair was pulled back messily, strands falling from a bun that had clearly been an afterthought. Her uniform was slightly wrinkled, but it was her eyes that gave her away. Their usual spark had dulled to a soft, aching red, the kind you only get after a night of holding it together. She moved like someone on autopilot. Quiet hellos, a tired smile. She went straight for the coffee pot and poured herself a cup, hands trembling slightly. Keanu waited until Doris ducked into the back to gently approach. "You okay?" Eva looked up, surprised. She hesitated, then offered the kind of smile that wasn't meant to reassure anyone. "Sofia had a rough night. We ended up at the ER again." Keanu's chest tightened. "Is she all right?" "She's stable now." Eva sipped her coffee. It started with shortness of breath, then chest tightness. "I didn't wait. We just went. They gave her oxygen and ran some tests. The doctors said it's progressing faster than they expected. She needs that surgery sooner than we thought." Keanu could see the weight she was carrying. It wasn't just the exhaustion, it was helplessness. "Is it scheduled?" Eva shook her head. "Insurance is still fighting us. They say it's elective. Can you believe that? Elective. Like we're asking for a nose job or something." She let out a sharp breath and tried to brush it off. "Anyway, she's home resting with my sister. I couldn't afford to call out again." "You should have stayed home with her," Keanu said gently. "I can't. Rent's due next week." She turned away then, heading for the back room with a tray of clean mugs. Keanu stood there, hands in his pockets, watching her disappear through the swinging door. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he took a deep breath and followed quietly, keeping his distance. As he reached the doorway, he paused. Inside the supply closet, Eva stood alone, facing the shelves stacked with napkins and condiments. Her shoulders began to shake, silent and small, and she covered her face with both hands. She didn't know anyone was watching. Keanu stepped back, giving her privacy, heart aching. Keanu didn't return to the front of the cafe right away. He lingered in the hallway just outside the supply closet, unsure what to do. He could still hear Eva's muffled breathing, deep, broken, quiet cries she was clearly trying to hide. That kind of grief had a sound that clawed its way through silence, and he knew it too well. He leaned against the wall, staring at the floor, torn between the impulse to comfort her and the need to respect her privacy. She'd held herself together for so long, working double shifts, raising a child on her own, pretending everything was fine. And now she was finally letting it slip. In a windowless room, surrounded by ketchup packets. When the crying faded, Keanu slipped away quietly. He didn't want to be there when she opened the door. He didn't want her to know she'd been seen like that. He remembered what it was like to feel exposed, and how important dignity was in those moments. Instead, he made his way out the back entrance and walked 2 blocks to a small bodega he'd passed earlier in the week. The shop owner barely looked up as Keanu stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling. He picked up a few things: Eva's favorite chamomile tea, a small pack of trail mix for Sofia, and a muffin that still felt warm in its wrapper. It wasn't much, it couldn't fix anything, but it was something. Back at the cafe, he waited until the lunch rush died down. Then, when Eva disappeared into the kitchen to refill the soup station, he slipped into the back room and gently placed the small brown bag on top of her locker. He didn't leave a note, he didn't want thanks. He just wanted her to have something, anything, that said, "You are not invisible." As he returned to the dish pit, he kept his head low and scrubbed plates in silence. The clatter of forks, the hum of orders being called out, the buzz of customers, he let it all wash over him. Later, as the shift neared its end, he caught sight of Eva returning to the back. A minute passed, then 2. When she came out again, her eyes were red, but her jaw was steadier. She didn't say a word, didn't look for who might have done it. But as she passed by him, she gently touched his shoulder, just for a second. No words. That night, back in his apartment, Keanu sat on his thin mattress with the lights off. He watched headlights slide across the ceiling, the only movement in the small, dim room. The image of Eva in that closet stayed with him. So did the sound of her trying to cry as quietly as possible, as if even that was a luxury she wasn't allowed. He didn't know how much longer he could stay silent. The next morning, Keanu rose early, unable to sleep past dawn. His neck ached from the awkward angle he'd collapsed in, and his mind was restless. He kept thinking about Eva, about how someone so strong could still be one breath away from breaking. And about Sofia, 9 years old, bright as firelight, and already facing battles grown men would struggle to carry. He brewed instant coffee with tap water and sat on the edge of the bed. Around him, the walls were still bare. He hadn't brought anything personal to decorate the apartment. On purpose. It was part of the deal. No Keanu Reeves comfort, no privilege. Just the bare bones of what most people lived with. A rickety table, a mattress on the floor, and silence. He pulled out his notebook, the one he'd started the first night. The pages were rough from handling, but still mostly blank. He clicked his pen. People think poverty is just about money. It's not. It's time, it's energy, it's attention. Every decision is survival math. He paused, thought of the moment Eva had picked up a dropped plate yesterday, apologized to the customer with a smile, then walked calmly back to the kitchen, only to cry where no one could see. He wrote again, and it's silence, the kind that comes from pride and exhaustion, the kind that hides behind supply closet doors. He closed the notebook slowly. By the time he arrived at the cafe, the morning rush was already building. Eva was at the register, her hair tied up messily, but her smile was in place. She greeted the customers as if nothing had happened. But something had. Keanu saw it in the slight slump in her shoulders, in the way her fingers trembled when she counted change. No one else noticed. No one ever did. Sofia wasn't there that morning, Eva explained briefly. She's with Mrs. Delgado today, still resting. That was all she said, and no one asked more. Keanu nodded and slipped into the back. He didn't press her for details, didn't ask how the ER visit had gone or what the doctors said. If she wanted to talk, she would, and if not, he'd be here anyway. He spent the rest of the shift helping behind the scenes, keeping the dish pit running and checking in with Doris, the manager, whenever something needed fixing. He kept his presence quiet, reliable, invisible, just the way Eva needed it to be. Near the end of the shift, Eva finally turned to him and said softly, "Thank you." She didn't say for what. She didn't have to. He just nodded once, hands still dripping from a fresh rinse of plates, And for a second, their eyes met. No fame, no spotlight, no pretending. Just one human being seeing another, quietly saying, "I'm here." And for Keanu, that felt like the most real thing he'd done in years. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tree-lined sidewalks as Keanu, still dressed in his worn flannel shirt and faded jeans, walked beside Eva on her way home. They moved in silence at first, Eva's hands deep in her coat pockets, her posture just a bit more tired than usual. The usual spark in her stride had dulled into a kind of quiet endurance. They passed a row of shuttered storefronts, a mural half faded on the brick wall beside them. Keanu glanced at Eva and saw that distant look again, the one he'd begun to recognize over the past week. It was the look of a person doing the math of survival in their head. One grocery bill, one overdue utility notice at a time. "I need to stop by the bank tomorrow," Eva finally said. "Hospital's making me meet with their financial counselor again. They want to go over my payment readiness before rescheduling the surgery." Keanu didn't say anything at first, he just nodded. Inside, he felt a quiet rage rise. Payment readiness. As if Sofia's heart had a countdown timer and the surgery would only be approved if the numbers looked tidy on a spreadsheet. "Is that for the deposit?" he asked gently. Eva nodded. "They say I need to show I can cover at least 30%. That's more than I make in 2 months. Maybe more than 3. She said it without bitterness, like it was simply weather. Rain again, or cold tomorrow. Except Keanu could hear the wear in her voice, the exhaustion beneath the surface of her strength. As they rounded the corner toward her apartment complex, a woman in a blue knit hat approached them. She had 2 kids in tow and held a small bag of groceries. Her face lit up when she saw Eva. "Eva," she said warmly, "how's Sofia doing?" Keanu watched Eva muster a smile. "She's hanging in there, Tina. Had a rough night, but she's better today." The woman hesitated, then stepped closer. She looked over her shoulder and then reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a folded bill. "I heard about the insurance thing. This isn't much, but just in case." It was a $40 bill, 2 20s creased from being folded over and over again. Eva's smile faltered. "Tina, I can't." "You can," Tina interrupted, gently but firmly. "It's from all of us. Some of the moms at the school were talking. We'll try to collect more, no pressure, just let us help." Eva looked down at the bills in Tina's hand, hesitating. Keanu could see the internal conflict on her face, pride and gratitude in a quiet war. Finally, Eva reached out and took the money. "And thank you," she whispered. They continued walking after Tina left, her children chattering behind her as they turned onto another street. Eva slipped the folded bills into the deep pocket of her coat. She didn't speak for several moments, and neither did Keanu. There was something reverent in the silence, something fragile that didn't need to be filled with words. Keanu glanced at her as they walked. Her jaw was clenched tighter than before, not in anger, but in restraint, as if the gesture from her friend had pressed too close to something she was trying hard to keep buried. "It's hard, isn't it?" Keanu finally said. Eva looked at him. "What is?" "Letting people help." She gave a small laugh, but it didn't carry joy. "Yeah, it makes you feel like you've failed somehow, even when you haven't." Keanu nodded slowly. "My sister used to say that pride is sometimes just love trying to protect itself." Eva considered that, the corners of her mouth lifting slightly. "That's actually pretty accurate." They stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the signal. Keanu watched a teenager on a skateboard pass them, earbuds in, oblivious to everything but his music. Cars rolled by. A bus hissed as it pulled to a stop, and beside him, Eva stood perfectly still, as if caught between motion and pause. "I don't want Sofia to grow up thinking she's a burden," Eva said softly. "I don't want her to see me scrambling for scraps, even when I am." "She won't," Keanu replied. "She sees your strength. She sees everything you do." Eva let out a slow breath as they crossed the street. "It's not about the $40, she said. "It's about being reminded that I can't do this alone. That no matter how hard I work, I'm still standing in a line somewhere, hoping someone believes my daughter is worth saving." The words hit Keanu hard. They walked another block before either of them spoke again. "I'm sorry you're going through this," Keanu said. Eva gave a faint smile. "You didn't cause it." "No," he said, "but I wish I could do more." She stopped in front of her building and looked up at the faded sign near the entrance. "You already are," she said. "You treat me like a person, not a case." That struck Keanu more deeply than he expected. He'd spent his entire career surrounded by people who either idolized or dismissed him based on what they thought they knew. This moment, standing outside a Warren apartment complex with a woman who had no idea who he really was, felt more real than any of it. "I'll see you tomorrow," Eva asked. "I'll be there," Keanu said. She gave a small nod and disappeared inside, the door clicking softly shut behind her. He stood there for a while, watching the building, feeling the cold settled in through his jacket. Then he turned and slowly walked away. That night, Keanu sat at the chipped kitchen table in his dim apartment, staring at his notebook. The pages were cluttered with scribbled observations about the café, about Eva, about Sofia's shy brilliance. But tonight, his pen hovered, hesitant. What he'd witnessed earlier had rattled something deeper. Not the money, not the gesture, but the moment Eva's hand trembled as she accepted it. He finally wrote one sentence across the top of the page. "There is no weakness in needing help." He underlined it hard. The image of Eva in the cold, hands tucked in her coat as she murmured thank you to a friend, stayed with him. The way she tried to smile as if nothing had happened. He recognized it. That quiet armor people wore when they didn't want to be seen as vulnerable. It was a look he'd worn himself years ago, after the deaths of people he loved. After nights when grief made him feel like the whole world was too heavy to carry. He'd had money back then, fame too, but it hadn't made the nights any quieter or the ache any less. Eva had neither wealth nor recognition, but she walked through her days with a courage he couldn't fake. He closed the notebook and pushed it aside, his mind drifting to Sofia. A brilliant little girl with a dream of building robots that helped people. A girl who could light up an entire room with her smile, and who might not get the surgery she needed in time because of a line item on an insurance form. The injustice made his stomach twist. He stood and began pacing the room. There was so much he wanted to do. He could fix all of this with a single phone call, one check. But doing so would destroy the fragile trust he'd built as Kevin Ryder. It would turn something human and honest into a spectacle. He thought back to something Frank had said when they first spoke about this bet. Real kindness never comes with a logo or a spotlight. You either show up or you don't. Keanu had shown up. But now he was running out of time. There were only a few days left in the challenge. After that, he would have to make a choice. Step back into his world and leave Eva and Sofia behind, or find a way to make his presence matter, even if it meant exposing the truth. But was Eva ready for that? Was he? The next morning came quickly, ushered in by the distant clang of a garbage truck and the smell of burnt toast from a neighbor's unit. Keanu got dressed slowly, pulling on his worn hoodie, the one Eva had once said made him look like he was always cold. As he stepped out the door and into the early light, his heart was heavier than usual, because now it wasn't just a challenge, it was personal. The morning buzz at the cafe felt different. It wasn't just the clatter of dishes or the usual banter between regulars. There was a quiet current of intention moving through the air, something unspoken but deeply felt. Eva didn't notice it at first. Her attention was on her daughter's health, on bills piling up, on getting through her shift without falling apart. But others had noticed. Chef Mateo, the gruff but soft-hearted man who ran the back kitchen, had seen Eva return from the hospital the night before looking pale and emotionally gutted. Without saying a word, he'd pulled Carla, the cafe's owner, aside. He wiped his hands on his apron, leaned in close, and said, "We should do something. For the kid." Carla didn't hesitate. "Pancake fundraiser, this Saturday morning. I'll cover ingredients, you donate time." Mateo nodded once. By noon, a glass jar had appeared on the front counter. It wasn't flashy, just an old mason jar with a handwritten label in black marker. "Help Sofia heal." No one announced it, no one needed to. The regulars noticed, looked at Eva quietly, and began to contribute. Some folded bills discreetly, others dropped change without making a sound. One elderly man, who always ordered a single cup of coffee and never spoke much, came in and placed a crisp $50 bill in the jar, then left without saying a word. Keanu watched from his usual seat by the window. It stirred something in him. Not the kind of emotion he felt on movie sets or at award shows. This was simpler, deeper, unstaged. Later that afternoon, while Eva was tending tables, Keanu stepped outside and walked down the block to a local print shop. It was a modest space operated by a mother and her teenage son. They printed church flyers, local event posters, and birthday banners. Keanu, still operating as Kevin, brought in a rough design idea scribbled in a notebook, something clean, with Sofia's smiling face sketched at the top, under the words, "Pancakes for Sofia. Saturday, 9 a.m. All proceeds go to her medical care." The boy behind the counter took one look and said, "We'll make it better. Give us 2 hours." When Keanu returned later to pick up the stack, the woman behind the counter refused to charge him. "We heard," she said. "My niece has a heart condition too. We want to help." Keanu thanked her, humbled. As he left, flyers in hand, he realized something profound. In this neighborhood, people didn't wait to be asked. They just showed up. Back at the cafe, Eva had just returned from a short break. She passed the mason jar and paused. It was already a third full. She stared at it, blinking fast. Then she whispered to Carla, "Who started this?" Carla just smiled. "I'm not sure, it kind of just happened." Eva looked down again, her voice quiet. "I don't know who started this, but I wish I could thank them." The next morning, the cafe door jingled more frequently than usual. Word had spread fast. Flyers appeared taped to storefront windows, bus stop signs, and the community center bulletin board. Keanu had placed several of them himself at sunrise, blending into the neighborhood as just another face with tape and a mission. Inside the cafe, the jar marked "Help Sofia Heal" was filling faster than anyone expected. A young couple came in just to donate, then left without ordering. A woman with paint-splattered jeans slid a 20 into the jar and handed Eva a small envelope, whispering, "It's not much. My daughter was sick once. I know how it feels." Eva stood behind the counter with a stunned look on her face. She hadn't asked for any of this. She was used to doing things alone, figuring out how to stretch tips, how to calm Sofia's breathing during long nights, how to smile even when she was falling apart inside. But now, all around her, people were stepping forward, quietly, generously, without conditions. Chef Mateo added a small chalkboard sign near the front door. "Join us this Saturday, pancake breakfast for Sofia." It had cartoon hearts drawn around it, thanks to the dishwasher's daughter, who had shown up early to help with decorations. Keanu kept himself busy folding more flyers, taking down names of volunteers, and coordinating with the print shop for a second batch. It felt good to be useful in a way that didn't involve being recognized or praised. No cameras, no spotlight, just doing the right thing in the background. In between refilling coffee cups and ringing up checks, Eva kept glancing at the jar. Her eyes welled up more than once, and each time she wiped them quickly, refusing to let her emotions spill in public. But when Carla came by and squeezed her shoulder, Eva didn't pull away. Around midday, Sofia walked in with Mrs. Garza from next door. The little girl moved slower than usual, still recovering from her recent episode. But her eyes lit up when she saw the flyers taped to the walls. She ran her fingers over one with her name in bold blue letters and a small sketch of a robot holding a heart. "Mom," she said, pointing. "That's me. Look, that's me." Eva smiled and knelt beside her. "Yes, baby. People are doing this for you. To help." Sofia's eyes widened. "Why?" Eva hesitated. Then she said softly, "Because sometimes when people see someone hurting, they just want to help, even if they don't know you." Sofia looked around the cafe. "Is this because of the robots?" Keanu, standing nearby, chuckled quietly. "It's because you're brave, and you dream big." Sofia gave him a curious look. "Are you coming to the pancake thing?" "I wouldn't miss it," Keanu said. Eva watched him as he spoke to her daughter. Something about the way he looked at Sofia, gentle, steady, no pity, just warmth, made her feel a quiet gratitude she couldn't yet explain. By the time Thursday rolled around, the cafe had changed, not in decor or layout, but in spirit. The usual chatter had shifted. Conversations weren't just about weather or weekend errands. They were about Sofia, about the fundraiser, about what time folks could show up to help cook or clean. People who hadn't spoken much before now greeted each other like neighbors. Keanu stood near the register, refilling the napkin holders while Carla counted bills behind the counter. She glanced at him. "Whoever started this thing lit a fire," she said. "You feel it too, don't you?" Keanu nodded. "I do. It's something special." She smiled. "Makes you wonder what else we could do if we looked out for each other like this all the time." He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The jar on the counter said plenty. Outside the cafe, a hand-painted banner was now draped between the two front windows. "Pancakes for Sofia, this Saturday." Beneath it, small hearts had been drawn with crayons, clearly the work of neighborhood kids. People passed by, tapped the glass, nodded in support. Inside, Keanu noticed Eva lingering near the sink after wiping down a table. Her hand rested lightly on the counter. Her shoulders rose and fell slowly, as if she were trying to process something that wouldn't fit into words. He walked over, hesitant. "You okay?" Eva looked up, startled, then nodded with a soft laugh. "Yes, I think I am. Just overwhelmed. In a good way, I guess." She looked out at the banner, the crayon hearts, the glass jar that now held more than $300. "I don't know who started this," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "But I wish I could thank them." Keanu held her gaze for a moment. His throat tightened. He wanted to tell her. Wanted to say that he was the one who bought the first batch of flyers, that he'd asked Carla and Mateo to help him set the plan in motion, but he couldn't. Not without unraveling everything. Not without exposing the lie behind Kevin Ryder. So instead, he said gently, "Maybe they don't need thanks. Maybe they just wanted to help because it was the right thing." Eva gave him a long look. Not suspicious, not probing, just full of something tender and searching. Then she smiled. Quiet, tired, but deeply genuine. "Well, whoever they are," she said, "they've done more than raise money. They've reminded me I'm not alone." Keanu felt the words settle in his chest like an anchor. All his life, people had told him what he meant to them because of the characters he played. But right now, standing beside Eva in that warm, bustling cafe, he was doing something real. Not as a celebrity, not even as a man with means, just as someone who cared. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. The morning sun had barely crested the buildings when Keanu, still in character as Kevin Ryder, stepped into the cafe. The bell above the door gave its familiar chime, and the scent of warm cinnamon and coffee settled around him like comfort. Eva was behind the counter, her dark hair pulled back loosely, a soft smile already waiting for him. "Morning, Kevin," she said, sliding a clean mug toward his usual seat. "You're early." Keanu smiled. "Couldn't sleep." Eva nodded. "Same." As he stirred his coffee, he noticed Sofia at a nearby table, hunched over her workbook. She looked tired, but her face lit up when she saw him. "Hey, Kevin," she called out. "Guess what?" "What's up?" he asked, taking the seat beside her. "I solved the loop problem you gave me. Look." She flipped her notebook around, showing off a hand-drawn sketch of a robot with a speech bubble that read, "Mission complete." Keanu laughed softly, genuinely impressed. "You're a genius, Sofia." Sofia grinned wide, then reached into her backpack. "And look what I saw on the way here." She pulled out a glossy movie flyer, folded in half but still readable. Keanu's stomach dropped. It was an ad for a film festival at the local theater. One of his own movies, an older one, nothing recent, was being re-released for a charity event. And there it was, his face. His real face. Sofia turned the flyer sideways, then back upright. "This guy looks kinda like you," she said innocently, squinting at him, "except your beard is scruffier." Keanu froze. Eva looked up from the register, and for the briefest moment, their eyes met. Her gaze dropped to the flyer in Sofia's hands, and Keanu saw it. Just a flicker of hesitation, a wrinkle of curiosity that hadn't been there before. "Huh," Eva said, nonchalantly wiping her hands on a dish towel. "A little bit, maybe. But Kevin's way more rugged." Sofia giggled. "Movie Kevin looks serious. You smile more." Keanu played along, laughing. "I'll take that as a compliment." He handed the flyer back, gently, careful not to let the tension show in his shoulders. But inside, his heart raced. Sofia tucked the flyer away without another thought, eager to return to her code. But Eva kept glancing over, her smile more guarded now. Something had shifted. The veil wasn't gone, but it had slipped. After breakfast, Keanu offered to walk Sofia to school. Eva hesitated before nodding. "Sure, I'll meet you back at the café." As they walked, Sofia chatted about robots and her dream of visiting the science museum again. Keanu smiled, nodding, but part of him was somewhere else entirely. Back in his apartment, he stared at the flyer on his kitchen table. He'd quietly taken a second copy on the way back. There was no denying it now. The cracks in the mask were starting to show, and once they did, he knew everything could fall apart. Keanu sat in silence for nearly an hour. The edges of the movie flyer curled slightly from his fingertips. The photo wasn't recent. It had been taken during a press shoot 5 years earlier, but it was still unmistakably him. Eyes half-shadowed, jaw set, hair slicked back. He looked tired in that picture too, though in a different way. It was only a matter of time. Eva was observant. She had to be. Raising a child alone, working double shifts, managing customers, she noticed things. And today, something had changed. Her voice had been warm, but her eyes had narrowed just a little too long on that image. The doubt had started. He paced his small apartment. The floor creaked in the same spot near the fridge, a detail he hadn't noticed until now. That creak reminded him where he was. Kevin Ryder's world, not Keanu Reeves's. Here he lived on canned beans and toast. Here he borrowed books from the library and washed his shirts by hand. Here, people were kind to him, without knowing what they could gain. That was the part he feared losing. Every part of him wanted to help Eva and Sofia. Every night he lay awake, debating how to make the surgery happen without revealing who he was. But if she found out on her own, and now that chance had grown, everything might unravel. He thought back to the conversation with Frank before this whole thing started. The bet hadn't been about deception. It had been about understanding. About shedding his name to see what people were really like when they weren't trying to impress him. But now, the experiment felt like a lie. He walked to the window and stared out over the rooftops. Down the street, the cafe bustled with morning energy. From this distance, he couldn't hear it, but he knew what it sounded like. Eva's gentle laugh when customers told her corny jokes. Sofia's voice bouncing from table to table, always asking questions. Chef Mateo shouting orders from the kitchen. Carla humming while sweeping the entryway. It was a world he hadn't expected to become so attached to. And yet, in just a few days, he'd felt more human than he had in years. The flyer sat on the counter now, next to the half-eaten toast he hadn't touched. He picked it up, folded it once more, and tucked it into a drawer. Not because it would stay hidden, but because he needed to stop staring at it. There was still time. Maybe Eva hadn't made the connection. Maybe she had, but was giving him the space to come forward. Or maybe she was quietly preparing to distance herself. Either way, the clock had started ticking, and if the truth didn't come from him soon, it might come from someone else. The next morning, the sun filtered through thin clouds as Keanu stepped into the cafe. The bell above the door gave its familiar jingle, but something felt different. Carla gave him her usual nod from behind the counter, but Eva was nowhere in sight. For a moment, he wondered if she'd decided not to come in at all. His heart tightened at the thought. Then he spotted her, by the coffee station, pouring a fresh pot. She glanced up. Their eyes met. She smiled. But it was different. It wasn't cold, not exactly, just careful. As if she were watching him from a little further away than usual. Not physically, but emotionally. That closeness they'd built, the easy rhythm of their days together, felt like it had slipped half a step off creep. He approached the counter slowly. "Morning," he said. "Morning, Kevin," Eva replied, setting down the pot and wiping her hands on her apron. "You're up early?" "Couldn't sleep," he admitted, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yeah," she said. "I know the feeling." He took his seat at the counter. A moment passed before she placed a mug of coffee in front of him. No toast today, just the coffee. Another small shift. "Everything okay?" he asked, studying her face. Eva nodded, too quickly. "Yeah, just tired. Sofia was up late working on her project, that robotics thing she keeps talking your ear off about." Keanu chuckled softly. "I like hearing about it. She's got a brilliant mind." "I think so too," Eva said, but there was something lingering in her tone, something unsaid. She looked like she wanted to ask a question and was holding it in. The silence stretched between them until it was interrupted by the arrival of a customer. Eva turned away to greet them. Keanu sipped his coffee, his thoughts spinning. He'd always known there'd be a moment like this, a moment where the truth knocked, soft at first, then louder. He just hadn't expected it so soon, or to care so much about the answer. When Eva returned, she wiped the counter absent-mindedly, then paused. "Hey," she said quietly, leaning in just enough so only he could hear. "Sofia saw a poster yesterday, some movie thing in a shop window. She said the guy looked just like you." Keanu's hand froze around his cup. Eva didn't press. She just met his gaze for a beat, then straightened. "I told her you just have one of those faces," she added softly. "But just thought you should know." Keanu opened his mouth, but no words came. Instead, he gave a slow, grateful nod. She nodded back, then moved on to another customer, leaving him alone at the counter. The air felt heavier now. The mask was cracking, and tomorrow it might shatter completely. The night before the fundraiser, Keanu sat at his small kitchen table with a plain white envelope in front of him. Inside it, he had placed 2 crisp $100 bills. It wasn't a life-changing amount, not by his usual standards, but here, living as Kevin Ryder, every dollar mattered. He had earned it, from odd writing gigs, careful budgeting, and skipping a few meals. It was the most meaningful money he had spent in years. He paused, staring at the envelope. For hours he had debated how to give it without revealing his identity. Eva would never take the money if she knew it came from him. Not like this. She had too much pride, too much grace. So he had drafted a short note, printed carefully in block letters so she wouldn't recognize his handwriting. You don't know me, but I've seen your strength. Your daughter has a beautiful mind and a brave heart. The world needs more people like her. Please, accept this small gift toward her future. From someone who believes in her." He tucked the note inside the envelope and sealed it slowly. His fingers lingered on the edge before pressing it shut. Then he slipped on his hoodie, pulled the brim of his cap low over his eyes, and headed out under the cover of dusk. Keanu walked 4 blocks through quiet streets until he reached the modest apartment building where Eva and Sofia lived. It was just past 9. Most lights were off. A faint hum of a TV echoed from one window. He climbed the short steps to the front entrance and opened the rusted mailbox panel. Eva's name was handwritten on a crooked label. Keanu slid the envelope into the box, heart pounding harder than it should have. For a man who had once stood on stage before thousands, this moment carried more weight than any performance. As he turned to leave, he hesitated. A soft breeze moved through the trees above the sidewalk, rustling the leaves like whispers. He didn't know why, but something about this small act felt bigger than it was. It wasn't just the money. It was the anonymity. The choice to help without reward. The invisible hand extended only because it was the right thing to do. He walked home quietly, head down, thinking not of himself but of Sofia, of the light in her eyes when she talked about building robots to heal hearts. He hoped tomorrow would be a good day. Saturday morning arrived with golden light spilling over the rooftops. By 8, the cafe patio was alive with folding chairs, red-checkered tablecloths, and the buttery scent of pancakes rising from the griddle. Carla had transformed the place. Chef Mateo worked the outdoor station like a magician, flipping heart-shaped pancakes for kids and humming Spanish tunes under his breath. Keanu stood in the crowd near the back, baseball cap pulled low, hoodie zipped. From a distance, he blended in, just another face in a sea of quiet hope and community kindness. He watched as neighbors filed in with envelopes, loose change, grocery store gift cards. There were hand-painted signs taped to the fence. Help Sofia heal. Fund her first robotics kit. Pancakes for a future engineer. Eva moved between tables, smiling but slightly overwhelmed. She wore a pink apron someone had embroidered with Sofia's mom in looping cursive. Sofia herself was at the front with a stack of handmade thank you cards and glitter markers, enthusiastically trading hugs for donations. The joy in her voice carried above the chatter. Keanu stayed near the oak tree at the edge of the yard. Close enough to see, far enough to stay invisible. He couldn't risk recognition. Not now. Not yet. Around mid-morning, Carla tapped the microphone and asked everyone to quiet down for just a moment. The clinking of plates paused. Eva was gently pulled forward, hesitant, cheeks flushed. "We have something special," Carla said, holding up a small envelope. This was found in the cafe mailbox yesterday morning, with no name, just a note inside and $200 in cash. The crowd murmured. "We think it came from one of you," she continued, smiling. "Whoever it was, they left a message too." "Eva, would you read it?" Eva's hands trembled as she took the envelope. She opened the flap slowly, slid out the folded note. She cleared her throat. Her voice wavered at first, then steadied. "You don't know me," she read, "but I've seen your strength. Your daughter has a beautiful mind and a brave heart. The world needs more people like her. Please accept this small gift toward her future from someone who believes in her." By the time she finished, her voice cracked, her eyes were wet. For a moment, the yard fell completely silent. Then someone began to clap, a slow, respectful clap that grew louder as others joined in. Eva looked up, blinking through tears, searching the crowd. She didn't know where to look. She didn't know who had written those words, but they had landed in the center of her chest. Keanu stepped slightly farther back under the tree, heart thudding. Watching her hold the envelope, her lips pressed together to keep from crying, he felt something shift inside him. Not guilt, something else, something like grace. Sofia ran over and hugged her mother's waist, peeking up at the letter as if it held some magical key. "Did someone really send that for me?" she asked in awe. Eva nodded, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. "Yes, sweetie. Someone who believes in you very much." Sofia looked around the yard, squinting into faces. "Maybe it was that guy who gave me the extra syrup," she whispered. Eva smiled through her tears and shook her head. Keanu leaned against the oak tree, watching the two of them. The moment hit harder than he expected. It wasn't the applause or even the note being read aloud. It was Eva's eyes. She had looked out across the crowd, not with a need to find the donor, but with the stunned expression of someone realizing they weren't as alone as they thought. People began to line up again at the table, digging into wallets, dropping bills into the jar. A young barista from a nearby coffee shop brought over a tray of iced drinks for volunteers. An elderly man in a military cap dropped a 50 and whispered, "For the little girl with the big ideas." The cafe had never been louder. Children danced to music playing from someone's speaker. People who barely spoke during the week now traded recipes, old jokes, and childhood stories as pancakes stacked higher on paper plates. Keanu kept his place in the shadows. He didn't want gratitude. That letter wasn't about credit. It was about showing Eva what the world could be. He remembered being hungry once, not for food, but for reassurance that someone saw him, really saw him. That letter had been for the version of himself that needed hope too. Suddenly, Sofia darted from the table and made her way toward the oak tree. Keanu stiffened. She moved fast, waving something in her hand. "Wait," she called. "Mr. Wait." He turned slightly, not sure what to do. Sofia reached him breathless and extended a folded pink paper. "I made extras," she said with a grin. "It's a thank you card. In case you know the person who gave my mom the envelope." Keanu took it carefully, his heart swelling. "I'll be sure to pass it on." Sofia gave him a thumbs up and ran back toward the tables. Keanu unfolded the paper. A robot with wings was drawn in purple crayon, hovering over a heart. Underneath, in wobbly letters, "Thank you for helping me fix hearts." He slipped it into his coat pocket like a sacred thing, and though no one else saw, Keanu Reeves, hidden in plain sight, smiled to himself. Something about that morning felt eternal. The cafe was quiet that morning, unusually so. Eva stood behind the counter, lost in thought as she dried a clean mug for the second time. Her body moved from habit, but her mind wasn't present. The fundraiser had helped, sure, but it still wasn't enough. Sofia's surgery hung over her like a storm cloud that never quite passed. She checked her phone again, hoping for something, anything, but the screen was blank, until it wasn't. An unknown number flashed. Eva hesitated. Most unknown numbers brought more problems. Debt collectors, hospital reminders, or insurance complications. But something in her gut told her to answer. "Hello?" she said, stepping into the hallway near the supply closet. "Hi, is this Ms. Eva Morales?" A woman asked, her voice calm and professional. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Brenda from Ridgeway Children's Hospital. I'm calling with an update about your daughter, Sofia." Eva's breath caught. She leaned against the wall. "Okay. I wanted to inform you that your daughter has been selected to receive full financial coverage for her surgery through a new non-profit fund recently activated." Eva blinked. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means the entire cost of Sofia's operation will be covered. All hospital bills, pre-op surgery, recovery, everything." There was a pause. "All of it?" Eva asked, barely above a whisper. "Yes, 100%. Eva didn't know whether to laugh or cry. How? Who?" The fund was created by an anonymous donor. Their request was that the first recipient be a child with great potential and a supportive community. Your daughter was chosen. A tear rolled down Eva's cheek. She wiped it quickly, still gripping the phone. "Please, tell them thank you, please. Just thank them for me." "I will. They asked for no credit, just that you know the surgery can now be scheduled as soon as possible." Eva pressed a hand to her chest. For a moment, the hallway seemed to spin. After weeks of fighting, struggling, holding herself together for Sofia, it felt like something inside her cracked, just enough to let the light in. Back at the counter, Carla glanced toward the hallway and saw Eva leaning against the wall, quietly crying. She didn't ask. She simply watched with soft eyes, her heart understanding more than words ever could. Eva eventually returned to the front. Her movements were slow, but lighter. She poured coffee, smiled faintly at a regular, and blinked away the tears that kept forming. Later, walking home with Sofia, Eva looked down at her daughter skipping beside her. The sun painted the sidewalk gold. She stopped, crouched, and touched Sofia's cheek. "Someone out there," she said gently, "just gave us a miracle." Sofia smiled, confused but curious. "An angel?" He nodded. "Maybe. Or someone who believes in people like us." Sofia looked up at her mother, puzzled by the sudden emotion in her voice. "Is it about my surgery?" she asked. Eva smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. You're going to have your surgery. The hospital called today." Sofia froze for a moment. "Wait, really?" Eva nodded, blinking back new tears. "They said everything's going to be covered. All of it." Sofia's eyes widened. She gasped and threw her arms around her mother's neck. "Mom, that's amazing. Does that mean I can go back to school soon and do robotics again?" Eva laughed, overwhelmed. "Yes, baby, it means everything." They stood like that on the sidewalk for a while, one mother holding the weight of too many nights of fear, and one child dreaming of gears and code and a future no longer stalled by a failing heart. That night, after dinner, Eva sat on the couch, legs curled beneath her, staring at a blank notepad. She'd tried writing a thank you letter, even though she had no name to write it to. Just, "To the angel who helped us," and then nothing. How could words capture what it meant to have someone reach into your darkest hour and, quietly, anonymously, hand you hope? Across the room, Sofia was rearranging her coding books, humming a made-up tune as she organized the sticky notes and penciled-in diagrams. The one Kevin, had given her still sat in the center of the pile. She called it her starter brain. Eva watched her daughter and thought again of the moment the hospital administrator said the words, "Anonymous donor." She had pressed Brenda for details, but the woman said there was no more to share. Only that someone had recently activated the fund. Someone who asked that the first gift be directed toward a single mother with a daughter who loved to build. The description was so specific it made her chest ache. She didn't want to believe it, but part of her mind kept circling back to Kevin. The way he looked at Sofia when she explained her ideas. The way he once paused, just slightly, when she'd mentioned the high costs of the surgery. There was something quiet about his presence, a kind of restraint she couldn't place, until now. He had the gentle confidence of someone who could move mountains, but was choosing not to. Still, it didn't make sense. Kevin wore the same 2 shirts. He brought his own mug to save a few cents. He walked everywhere, always on foot. If he had money to give, why would he live like that? Unless he wasn't who he said he was. The thought scared her more than she wanted to admit. Because if Kevin wasn't just a kind stranger, if he was something more, it meant everything she knew about him might have been built on a lie. And yet, if he was the one who helped, then didn't that say something deeper? Eva folded her arms across her chest, her heart heavy with questions she couldn't answer. There was gratitude, but tangled in it was doubt. Not the kind that questioned whether the help was real, but the kind that asked, what would it mean if it was him? She got up and walked quietly to Sofia's room. Her daughter had fallen asleep on top of her books, curled beside a half-drawn blueprint of a robotic heart. Eva kissed her temple and whispered, "You're going to be okay." Then she turned off the light and walked back to the living room. On the table lay the envelope from the hospital. She stared at it for a long moment. If someone had helped them out of pity, she would have sensed it. If it was charity, there would have been strings. But this, it felt like something else. Someone had seen them, really seen them, and decided they were worth fighting for. Keanu sat on the worn wooden bench in the quiet park, the low sun painting golden streaks through the branches above. The folded letter in his pocket weighed more than paper should. He had rewritten it 5 times. Crumpled drafts filled his trash can, but now, sitting here, he knew the letter wasn't enough. He had to say it to her face. Eva arrived just past 5. She looked tired, a canvas tote slung over her shoulder and a small brown bag in her hand, probably Sofia's dinner. She paused when she spotted him. Her steps slowed. She came forward cautiously, a guarded expression on her face. "You said you needed to talk," she said. Keanu stood. "Thanks for coming. I've been meaning to say something for a while now, but I kept putting it off." She gave a small shrug. "You don't owe me anything." "I do, actually. A lot more than you know." He paused, steadying himself. "My name isn't Kevin Ryder." Eva blinked. "What?" "My real name is Keanu Reeves." She stared, clearly confused. "What are you talking about?" I'd been living under a different name. I needed to disappear for a bit, to live without my identity or wealth. A friend challenged me. He said I'd learn more about humanity by stepping into someone else's shoes. So I did. That's why I ended up in that apartment. At the café. Eva looked like the air had been knocked from her chest. "So this was all some experiment?" "It started that way," he said quickly. "But once I met you and Sofia, it stopped being about the challenge. It became about you." Her voice dropped to a near whisper. "You lied." "I did," he admitted, "and I hate that I did. But everything I shared, everything I felt, none of that was fake. Your kindness, Sofia's strength, they changed something in me." She crossed her arms. "You let me open up to you. About my daughter, our struggles. And all the while, you were, what? Taking notes?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "I wasn't taking notes. I was listening, learning, feeling things I hadn't felt in years." "You could have told me at any point," she said. "But you let me believe you were one of us, that you understood." "I do understand," he said. "Not because of money, but because I was there. I saw how hard it is to keep going with dignity when everything feels impossible. I saw your strength, Eva. I saw your love for Sofia." She looked away, her jaw clenched, eyes glassy. "I came here to tell you the truth. You deserve it, even if it costs me everything." After a moment, she whispered, "I need time." He nodded, and without another word, Eva turned and walked away, the bag in her hand swinging gently by her side. Her steps were firm, but her shoulders trembled. Keanu didn't follow. He stood there, watching the fading light, feeling like the loneliest man in the world. The next morning was colder than expected. Keanu sat on the edge of his mattress, staring at the blank wall across from him. He had barely slept. Eva's words echoed in his head, "I need time." The way she had walked away, steady but visibly shaken, was burned into his memory. He made coffee, but didn't drink it. Instead, he paced the small apartment, uncertain of what to do next. The week that was supposed to be a social experiment had become something else entirely. Now, with the truth exposed, he no longer had the shelter of anonymity. And without that, he felt stripped bare. Around noon, Keanu walked to the café, not to go inside, just to stand across the street. The fundraiser signs were still in the window. He watched through the glass as Eva worked behind the counter. Her movements were different today, more efficient, more reserved. She didn't linger with customers or laugh like she had before. Her walls were up. He caught a glimpse of Sofia peeking through the kitchen door. She waved at someone, then disappeared, probably unaware of what had happened the night before. Keanu stepped back, blending into the flow of pedestrians. He knew it wasn't his place to intrude, not yet. If Eva was going to speak to him again, it would have to be on her terms. That night, he sat at his desk and opened his laptop. Not for work, but to email Frank. His friend had helped coordinate the donation to the hospital fund, anonymously, just as they had planned. But now, Keanu wanted to go further. He explained everything in the message: how the reveal had gone, how Eva had walked away, and how uncertain everything felt now. Frank replied quickly. His message was short, but thoughtful. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't mean being understood. It just means being willing to let go of control. If she finds her way back to you, let it be her choice. Keanu sat with that for a while. Then he pulled out his notebook, the one he had used since the start of this journey. He turned to a blank page and began to write. I've played 1,000 roles, some on camera, some off. But this one, Ryder, taught me something none of the others did. That dignity doesn't come from what you have. It comes from how you treat people when they think you have nothing. The pen moved slowly across the page. His handwriting was a little messier than usual. He wasn't writing for anyone else, just for himself. He wrote about Eva's resilience, about Sofia's curiosity, about a neighborhood that had opened its arms to a stranger with nothing to offer. When he finally set the pen down, he felt a strange kind of peace, not resolution, not closure, but acceptance. He had told the truth. And now he would wait. Sometimes that's all you can do. Be honest, and then let someone else decide if they still see you the same. The next afternoon, Keanu returned to the park. Not with expectations, just with hope. He sat on the same bench where Eva had walked away. The city moved around him, distant chatter, the hum of traffic, a child's laughter echoing from the swings. He had no plan, no follow-up message, only the weight of waiting. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw her. Eva walked slowly toward him, hands in the pockets of her coat, her eyes unreadable. She didn't sit, not right away. She stood in front of him, searching his face. Her expression held no smile, but it wasn't closed either. I read your notebook, she said quietly. Frank sent me a copy. Keanu's breath caught. He hadn't expected that. It doesn't fix the lie, she continued, but it made it real. He nodded, afraid to speak and ruin whatever this was. I still need time, she said finally, but I wanted you to know. I see the man you were trying to be. With that, she turned and walked away again, but this time, she looked back once. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. Keanu stood in front of the mirror in his tiny apartment, the same mirror that had greeted him each morning with cracked edges and poor lighting. The reflection staring back no longer looked like the movie star the world knew. The hoodie, the tired eyes, the rough stubble. This was Ryder now, a man who had walked unfamiliar streets, slept on a lumpy mattress, and tasted a kind of life he hadn't known in decades. The duffel bag at his feet was already zipped, holding only the few items he'd acquired during his stay. A paperback novel from the corner store, Sofia's first doodle of a robot, which she had shyly handed him one afternoon, a receipt from the diner with a smiley face drawn next to thank you, souvenirs of something deeper than just a bet. Frank's car was already waiting 2 blocks over. It was a sleek, dark sedan with tinted windows, a vehicle that did not belong on this street. But Keanu had insisted the pickup point be away from the diner, He didn't want a show. No goodbyes. Not like this. He took one last look around the apartment. The ceiling leak he'd stopped noticing. The chipped table where he'd written reflections in a battered notebook. The window that gave a partial view of the café where Eva worked. This space had been cramped, imperfect, and cold. But it had given him something his mansion couldn't. Perspective. Humility. A sense of belonging, even if it had been built on a lie. As he walked down the stairwell, each step echoed with a strange weight. At the bottom, he paused. Through the dusty front glass door, he saw the block he had memorized without trying. The elderly man who always watered the sidewalk. The girl who chalked pictures after school. The smell of burnt toast wafting from the cafe. Then he saw Eva. Not up close, but through the window of the diner. She was clearing a table, her hair pulled back in a loose braid, her movements quick and practiced. Her face looked tired but not broken. She didn't know he was watching. And she didn't need to. Keanu's throat tightened. There were no words to capture the gratitude he felt, or the sorrow. No script for this ending. Frank stepped out of the car as Keanu approached. The door opened silently, but Keanu stood still, glancing once more at the street corner. "I didn't just lose the bet," he said softly, barely above a whisper. "I lost something I didn't know I needed." Frank didn't respond. He didn't need to. Keanu climbed into the back seat. As the car pulled away, he looked out the window, watching the cafe disappear behind them. He didn't wave. He just held the silence close, like a memory he didn't want to let go. The car ride back to the hills felt longer than usual. The silence wasn't awkward, it was contemplative. Frank kept his eyes on the road while Keanu stared out the window, not at the buildings, but through them. His mind retraced the last 10 days. The warmth of Eva's voice, the fire in Sofia's eyes, the quiet generosity of strangers who gave without ever expecting anything in return. "You okay?" Frank finally asked, his tone measured. Keanu nodded, though his jaw remained tight. "Yeah, just different." Frank glanced at him. "That neighborhood has a way of doing that." Keanu looked over. "You knew this would happen." "I hoped," Frank replied. "The point wasn't just to win a bet, it was to remember what the world looks like without a spotlight on you." Keanu leaned back in his seat. "You were right. I thought I'd go in, observe, prove something about how people act around status. But I ended up feeling too much." They pulled into the gated driveway of Keanu's secluded home. Everything was just as he left it. The clean-cut hedges, the modern architecture, the stillness. The kind of stillness that once felt luxurious. Now, it felt empty. He stepped out slowly, grabbing the duffel bag from the back. As Frank parked, Keanu walked up the steps to the front door. He didn't go inside right away. Instead, he sat on the stone ledge by the entrance and opened his notebook. He flipped past pages of journal entries scribbled during his days as Kevin Ryder. Thoughts on humility, notes on the resilience of single mothers, sketches of robot ideas Sofia had explained in breathless detail. One page simply read, "Kindness feels like air when you don't have enough of it." Keanu pulled out a pen and turned to the last blank page. He didn't write a reflection, he wrote a name. The Sofia Heart Fund. He underlined it twice. Then he stood, went inside, and walked to his home office. On the wall hung a framed photograph of his younger self on the set of one of his first films. He stared at it for a long moment, then took it down. In its place, he pinned Sofia's drawing of a robot with a heart. Then he opened his laptop. No assistants, no board meetings, just him and a blank wire transfer screen. He took a breath and entered the amount. $5 million. It was more than enough to launch a foundation, enough to help hundreds of families. And yet, it still didn't feel like enough. Not because of the money, but because he couldn't buy back the look in Eva's eyes when she walked away from him in the park. He clicked send. The screen blinked, confirming the transfer. Keanu closed the laptop, sat back in his chair, and whispered into the quiet, "This is for them, and for the man I hope I can still become." Later that night, Keanu stood barefoot on the balcony of his home, the city lights flickering far below, like stars that had fallen to earth. He held a cup of tea, letting the warmth settle in his palms, but his mind was still with Eva and Sofia. He pictured them sitting at their tiny kitchen table, maybe sharing a bowl of soup, maybe Sofia showing off one of her sketches again. He thought about what he had told Frank. "I didn't just lose the bet. I lost something I didn't know I needed. Not money, not pride, something quieter, deeper. Connection." Keanu had spent his life surrounded by applause, headlines, premieres. But this quiet week, the toast and tea, the walks through cracked sidewalks, the flyer with Sofia's crooked handwriting, had stripped away the illusion. It had reminded him of who he was before all of it, and what truly mattered. He looked up at the stars, searching for something he couldn't name. Then he turned back inside and lit a single candle by the window. A quiet tribute to a little girl with a robot dream and a mother who had unknowingly changed his life. And this time, there was no mask. Keanu stood in the quiet apartment, the one with the squeaky faucet and thin walls that had somehow become familiar. The suitcase beside him was light, just a few thrift store clothes and a notebook filled with thoughts he hadn't dared speak aloud. His week as Kevin Ryder was over. The bet with Frank was technically complete, but what weighed on Keanu's chest wasn't winning or losing. It was what he had come to feel in this place, among these people, and most of all, around Eva and Sofia. The morning light spilled through the small window, casting soft shadows over the faded carpet. He looked around one last time, the memories swirling. The quiet breakfasts at the café, Sofia's laughter over coding puzzles, Eva's exhausted smile, warm even when life pressed hard. He hadn't expected to care this deeply, but somewhere between washing dishes and scribbling reflections, he had come to see this world not as an experiment, but as real life. A black town car waited discreetly a block away, just as planned. Keanu zipped the suitcase shut and paused at the door. His fingers hesitated on the knob. He glanced back. No cameras, no fans, just silence. Just truth. When he stepped outside, the neighborhood greeted him like it always had, without pretense. A boy on a bike sped by, a mother pushed a stroller, and two old men argued about baseball on a corner bench. Life unchanged. But something inside him had shifted. Each face now carried weight. Each small kindness a thread in the tapestry of something he hadn't known he was missing. As the car pulled up and the door opened, Keanu slid into the leather seat. He looked back at the block, the diner just beyond view, and murmured, "I didn't just lose the bet." He paused. "I lost something I didn't know I needed." Frank was already waiting when Keanu arrived at the private lounge nestled in the hills above the city. It was a quiet spot, far from flashing lights or the buzz of industry, just oak trees, shaded paths, and the sound of birds that didn't care who anyone was. Keanu stepped out of the car and walked up slowly. Frank stood with his arms crossed, watching his friend carefully. Keanu wasn't wearing the hoodie and boots anymore, but something in his expression was different. Calmer, maybe. Or cracked? Frank didn't speak at first. He just nodded toward the bench under the trees. They sat in silence for a while. "I could have just told you you'd lose," Frank finally said, his voice gentle. "I needed to see it," Keanu replied. Frank nodded again. "So, what did you find out?" Keanu stared down at his hands. That people like Eva are stronger than I'll ever be. That kindness doesn't need a spotlight. That I've been surrounded by applause for so long, I forgot how powerful quiet can be. Frank studied him. "And I miss her. I miss them both," even now. Frank let out a long breath. You didn't just step into someone's shoes, Keanu. You walked into someone's life. I know. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full of truth. Keanu reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded check. He handed it to Frank without a word. Frank opened it, blinked, then looked up sharply. This is a lot. It's a start, Keanu said, for something real. I want to call it the Sofia Heart Fund. It shouldn't just be about them. It should help anyone who's ever had to choose between groceries and medicine, between dignity and survival. Frank held the check like it was made of glass. You sure about this? Keanu nodded. More than anything. That evening, Keanu sat alone at his desk, staring at the glowing city skyline. It looked different now, not because the buildings had changed, but because he had. His penthouse felt quieter than it used to, less like a reward and more like a reminder. He opened his laptop and began drafting the official documents to launch the Sofia Heart Fund. The name brought a faint smile to his face. He could still hear her voice, the excitement when she explained how she wanted to build robots that could heal hearts. The simplicity of her dream made it feel massive. With the help of Frank and a team of advisors, he outlined the mission: provide anonymous medical grants for families with children in critical need. No red tape, no public announcements, just quiet help when and where it was needed most. Keanu paused for a moment and added a final line to the fund's charter, inspired by the courage of a mother and the hope of a child who dared to dream. He hit save. The room was still. No applause, no reporters, just him, a quiet click of keys, and the knowledge that this mattered. The next morning, as the sun began to rise, he packed a small envelope and addressed it by hand. Inside was a letter for Eva. Not from Keanu Reeves, the actor, but from Kevin, the man she had known. He didn't mention fame or movies or even the fund. He just wrote, "Thank you for seeing him, for trusting him, for reminding him what it means to simply be present for another human being." He left the envelope with Frank to deliver, then leaned back in his chair. He had returned to his whirl of wealth and influence. But something had stayed behind on that small city block. Something unshakable. Something true. He whispered to the empty room, "Thank you, Sofia." The morning light slanted gently through the tall windows of the Foundation's new office, casting a warm glow over the simple meeting room. Keanu stood by the window, dressed simply, looking out at the city below. It wasn't a grand skyscraper or some intimidating glass tower. It was a modest 3-story building in the same neighborhood he had once quietly walked through as Kevin Ryder. He had insisted the headquarters be close to the people they wanted to help. The door opened softly behind him. Eva stepped in, holding Sofia's hand. They looked different now. Eva's posture was relaxed, her eyes no longer rimmed with fatigue. Sofia, full of energy, had traded hospital bracelets for a purple backpack covered in robotics pins. "Welcome," Keanu said, turning to face them. His voice was steady, but his smile held emotion. Eva glanced around the room, noting the photos of community events, the drawings from local school children tacked to a bulletin board, and the large dry erase board covered in program ideas. "This is where it all happens?" she asked quietly. Keanu nodded. "This is where we listen, and where we try to make things better, one real story at a time." Sofia stepped forward, bouncing slightly. "Mom said we might help design a robotics program for other kids like me. Is that true?" Keanu grinned. "Absolutely. In fact, you're the reason it's happening. You inspired the whole idea." Sofia beamed. Eva looked at him for a moment, then pulled out a chair and sat down. Her voice was steady, but her words carried weight. "I wasn't sure I'd come." "I know," Keanu replied gently. "You lied to me," she said. "You pretended to be someone else, and yet somehow you were more real than anyone I'd met in years." "I was lost," he admitted. I didn't know how disconnected I'd become until I met you and Sofia, until I saw how strength really looks." She studied him for a long moment, the silence filled with years of struggle neither of them had to explain. Then she finally said, "I don't think you came here to fix us. I think you came here to understand." Keanu didn't respond right away. He just nodded once, deeply. At that moment, the door opened again, and Frank entered with two more guests. Two teenage students from the local high school who had just been approved for scholarships through the foundation. Keanu turned to Eva and Sofia. "I want you on our community advisory board. You'll be compensated. Your experience, your voice, it matters more than any report or policy." Eva looked at him, then at her daughter. Sofia was already scribbling ideas for a new robot on the edge of the dry erase board. "All right," Eva said quietly. "We're in." 3 months after her surgery, Sofia had transformed. She wasn't just healthier, she was radiant. Her energy filled every space she entered, from the café where her drawings still decorated the community bulletin board, to the new after-school tech lab, funded by an anonymous grant no one could quite trace. But Eva knew. She had seen the fingerprints of Keanu's compassion in every detail. He never signed his name, never stood on a stage, but the impact was unmistakable. The day the community clinic reopened with expanded hours and new equipment, a bouquet had arrived for the staff with a simple note, "From someone who believes in neighbors." The scholarships for single mothers enrolled in night classes, the surprise batch of brand new laptops at the elementary school, the silent donor who covered the cafe's air conditioning repair during a brutal heat wave. It was Keanu. Or rather, it was who Keanu chose to become after walking their streets. One afternoon, Eva stood outside the cafe during her break, sipping a to-go cup of tea. Across the street, Keanu knelt beside a boy showing off his cardboard robot, built from cereal boxes and copper wire. The boy's mother watched nervously, unsure who this stranger was, but Keanu didn't push. He simply listened, encouraged, smiled. He wasn't a celebrity here, he was just someone who saw them. Eva stepped off the curb, crossed the street, and joined them. The boy eagerly explained how the robot could catch bad guys, but also give hugs. Keanu laughed and clapped. "You should come by the new lab," Eva told the boy and his mom. "We've got supplies and a 3D printer now, all free." The boy's eyes widened and his mother's shoulders relaxed. Later that day, back at the foundation office, Keanu pulled out a journal, one he'd started during his week as Kevin Ryder. The pages were worn now, filled with observations, sketches, bits of dialogue, and reflections from quiet corners of the diner and late nights in his temporary apartment. One entry caught his eye. "Kindness that asks for nothing in return is the rarest form of wealth." He set the journal down and looked up as Eva walked into the office with Sofia in tow. "We're thinking about our next round of grants," Keanu said. Eva suggested we focus on programs that don't just serve people but include them, empower them. Sofia nodded. "What if we funded teams of kids to build real stuff? Not just robots, but things that help the neighborhood, like ramps for stores, or air monitors, or food delivery carts for seniors." Frank, seated nearby, smiled. "Looks like we found our director of innovation." Sofia's eyes widened, and Eva laughed softly. "We've got ideas," Eva said, "plenty of them." Keanu leaned back in his chair, taking it in. He had once come here undercover, searching for truth in other people. Now, he was building something real, with them, not for them. This, finally, felt like home. There are moments in life that don't make headlines. Moments that happen quietly, on street corners or in diners with chipped mugs and warm coffee. I used to think that change came from power, from the ability to reshape systems, command attention, move money. But now I know that change, real, lasting change, often starts in silence, with a child's whisper about her dream to build robots that heal. with a mother who shows up every morning, tired and underpaid, but still smiles at strangers like they matter. With neighbors who pass around a collection jar not because they're rich, but because they remember what it means to need. I walked into Eva's world expecting to observe. I left understanding. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't seen for what I had. I was seen for who I was. Or maybe more truthfully, for who I could be if I let myself stay open. Sofia changed me. Her resilience, her clarity. She never asked for pity. She didn't even ask for help. She just kept showing up. With a sketchbook full of inventions and eyes that refused to give up. She reminded me that purpose isn't something you buy. It's something you live. Eva changed me too, not with speeches, not with grand gestures, but with small acts. A few extra slices of toast, a hand steadying a coffee pot even after a night without sleep. She carried her world on her back and still found space to offer me kindness. That kind of grace. It doesn't come from comfort, it comes from choice. And I had to ask myself, what kind of man was I when no one was watching? What kind of legacy do I leave if I spend my days surrounded by people who are paid to smile, but never dare to ask how I really am? That's what this experiment gave me. Not a social lesson, a human one. There are moments in life that don't make headlines, moments that happen quietly, on street corners or in diners with chipped mugs and warm coffee. I used to think that change came from power, from the ability to reshape systems, command attention, move money. But now I know that change, real, lasting change, often starts in silence. With a child's whisper about her dream to build robots that heal. With a mother who shows up every morning tired and underpaid, but still smiles at strangers like they matter. With neighbors who pass around a collection jar not because they're rich, but because they remember what it means to need. I walked into Eva's world expecting to observe. I left understanding, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't seen for what I had. I was seen for who I was, or maybe more truthfully, for who I could be if I let myself stay open. Sofia changed me. Her resilience, her clarity, she never asked for pity. She didn't even ask for help. She just kept showing up. With a sketchbook full of inventions and eyes that refused to give up, she reminded me that purpose isn't something you buy. It's something you live. Eva changed me too. Not with speeches, not with grand gestures, but with small acts. A few extra slices of toast. A hand steadying a coffee pot, even after a night without sleep. She carried her world on her back and still found space to offer me kindness. That kind of grace, it doesn't come from comfort. It comes from choice. And I had to ask myself, what kind of man was I when no one was watching? What kind of legacy do I leave if I spend my days surrounded by people who are paid to smile but never dare to ask how I really am? That's what this experiment gave me. Not a social lesson, a human one.